wanna be educated, but I'm so frustrated. Hello to my loneliness. I guess that ignorance is bliss.
Welcome to Parkstone at Home, a podcast where we talk property, home and living in Queensland, Australia. If you own property or are interested in investing, or if you're like me and are currently renting, then this is a podcast for you. As always, I'm Hayley, Marketing Director, and I'm joined by Elizabeth Jackson, owner of Parkstone Property and local Mackay entrepreneur.
I wish I knew.
This episode, we will be discussing rent payment cycles. What are they and what happens when it goes wrong? All right, so episode 2. I'm super excited to be jumping into our next episode. We're thinking this one will be a little bit shorter than our first one, so we can really nail down some of these topics. But first and foremost, how are you, Elizabeth?
Good.
Good?
Good, yeah. Ready to roll into, this podcast and share some knowledge.
Fantastic. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of just something to ease in that's not property related for the start of the podcast, something a bit interesting. Yep. What's been something that's been inspiring or motivating or something that happened recently that you'd be willing to share? I'm happy to start because I've got something. I don't know if anyone listening has ever seen the show Ted Lasso. Mm-hmm. One of my favourites. My mum loves it as well. But something that came back up for me very recently was this little speech that he gives about being curious and not judgmental. Mm-hmm. And I went back and forth with my in-laws about it last night, and I just think that that's something that I really want to reintroduce, I suppose, into my life, just about everything. I think it applies to a lot of different things. So, when it comes to people that you're dealing with or stuff you're doing, just, being curious and not judgmental. So that's me.
There's... I like to zone out with TikTok, which is, probably a good thing and a bad thing on its own. But there is a trend, or there's been a trend on TikTok of we listen, we don't judge.
Oh, I've seen that.
And I think that's really important in life in general, of just being open. And it's something that I live by, I suppose, of any conversation I have or anybody I meet, it's listening to their story or listening to their situation and not judging. And I think too, from a customer service point of view, we don't know what's going on in the background for these people. So it may be they've got some financial stress, which then sometimes can come through in the way they communicate with us as property managers. But, we don't know what is compounding behind the conversations that they have with us. So I think it's really important. It's something I live by, of just being kind and empathetic to people and listening to them, because generally after they've had a chat, they've got something off their chest, or they hear that you're listening to them, they tend to relax and they're not, like, they may have been a little bit angry to begin with, and then as the conversation flows through, they're, oh, okay, this person's not actually going to get up me about something, or they're not being, they're not angry, or they're not being harsh with me. They're actually listening and understanding. I think that goes a long way. And absolutely. The no judgment thing. I feel like, we're only human. We will judge.
Yeah, I think it's deceptively hard to just say that. I'd be like, I don't judge, but everyone does, and it's just like a survival instinct. I think, because we have to make some judgments sometimes. But
it's tough too, because I may not judge in my head, but sometimes my face doesn't get that memo, and then it instantly says what I may be thinking or not thinking at the time. So I have to try really hard to keep a poker face, or just be happy in my face when I'm thinking something else. So judge. It's something that we should all work on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that our both little motivating thing was kind of similar today, so that's really fun. So moving on from that, I wanted to introduce another new segment, which I'm pretty excited about. I'm calling it What's the Word on the Street, because I love Sesame Street. And what I really want to do is sort of give you a few phrases that are thrown around a lot in property management, and just see if you can break them down for people like me who are just renting or don't know anything about it, who don't know what these phrases mean, just to help us kind of understand bit more about it. So the first one is, it's Just 3 letters. GTA, what does that mean?
So in property management world, when we talk of a GTA, it's a general tenancy agreement. So it's a formal, legally binding document. Once you sign that, it is legally binding. Right. You're stuck with that property, or and then it becomes a completely different circumstance if you have to break that, or in our words is breach. So you're
breaching it.
Yeah.
So is that the same thing as your lease?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just I suppose it's the legislative word for the lease document.
Fantastic. All right, next word I've got for you is fixed term agreement.
Okay, so same kind of deal. Fixed term agreement is going from one start date to one end date. So it's a fixed term. Most owners, if not all owners now, especially with the changes in the legislation, want fixed term agreements. Their insurers want fixed term agreements. So if they've got landlord's insurance, they want them to, your tenants to be, or want the tenants to be on a fixed term agreement. So a start point and an end date, because that's guaranteed tenancy. If it rolls to a periodic, it changes a lot of things for the owner. So a periodic agreement is where there is no end date and it just rolls. So a fixed term agreement is something that all owners will want their tenants to be on because it's secured, guaranteed rent for a period of time.
Okay, fantastic. I've got 4 for you today, so we're really rolling through it. Lease renewal.
So there's a grey area, depending who you talk to, what a lease renewal actually is.
Okay.
So I listen to a lot of Stacey Holt media, and she's very, very heavy in the legislation, great teacher, and she doesn't believe there's such thing as a lease renewal because you are going from a GTA or a fixed term agreement with set dates to then going to a new lease agreement with new set dates. So it's lease to lease, but it's not a renewal as such because all the same terms and conditions, well, they do come from the first lease and roll into the second because they're the same, but there might be a slight change of a rent increase or a bond increase. There might be 100% water consumption in there perhaps, so it's not technically then a lease renewal because it's not the same that's going over. But basically when we talk lease renewals, it's when you are still in the property and you renew your lease or you take on another lease agreement, another fixed term, general tenancy agreement, and it's a very loose term, broad term lease renewal. We like to talk to our owners about lease renewals about 2 to 3 months out from your expiry as a tenant, so that gives us time to discuss what you may want as a tenant, what the owner may want of their intentions with the property. If there's rent increases, that comes into play as well with that time frame. But if the owner wants you to move out, the minimum notice periods that we have to give, that's why we start so early because it is a minimum of 60 days, which in the current market, which is pretty strong right now for owners, it's very much there's not enough property and many, many tenants. Yep. So we like to try and give as much notice as possible in that sense. But if the tenant in the existing property or the existing tenant in the property is happy to stay on, there might be a slight rent increase, we can pretty much wrap all that up in that period of time before the expiry. There's nothing in legislation to say we have to do it like the day before the expiry. Okay. We like to do things in advance, well in advance. So then the tenant too has an idea and has that stability that they know, okay, I'm here for the next 12 months. Yep, okay, the rent's going to be increasing on this date, but I know that I'm here until, say, for example, June next year or December next year, and I don't have to worry about getting a notice to leave or anything like that. I'm set here because it's that fixed term agreement.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I've got one last one for you, and that's arrears or arrears. How do you say that normally? Arrears?
Yeah, arrears. So
tell me about that.
We refer to that mostly in relation to rent. So if you are behind in your rent, then you are in arrears. We prefer our tenants to be in front. And like in theory, we all want our tenants to be in front by at least 2 weeks, because then when you, in theory, give your notice to vacate at the expiry of the lease, you give the notice with 2 weeks notice ahead, because that's the minimum. And then technically, in theory, you shouldn't have to pay any more rent, because if you're ahead by 2 weeks, that includes that 2 weeks of that notice period.
Yep.
That's in theory how it's supposed to work, but
Yes.
not everything is equal. So that's what we'd like, but it doesn't always work that way.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, cool. So that's the end of our word on the street. Thank you so much for explaining some of those. Okay. So let's get into the actual topic of our episode. So rent payment cycles. So I suppose you just touched on that a little bit when you're talking about arrears, but we're going to dive right into that a bit better.
Okay.
So obviously it's related to rent. We know that rent means it's the amount that we have to pay weekly or fortnightly or whatever it is. That's obvious to us. But what's a rent payment cycle? Can you sort of unpack that for us?
So when we talk rent payment cycles, we think about, okay, you pay rent and you pay a week ahead. It's not technically a full week. So let's say, for example, your rent is due on a Wednesday and your rent cycle period starts on a Wednesday. It will go Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, midnight. So it's actually just shy, in theory, of 7 days. So then your rent is due again on the Wednesday. So in a perfect world, and how I like to set things up with my tenants from the get-go is, yes, you pay your first 2 weeks rent. Like when you've been at the property for 1 week, we set up a direct debit. So then you're constantly paying in advance, so paying ahead for periods of time that you haven't actually been there yet, but it means that you're ahead. And because if your rent is due on a Wednesday, you actually should pay it on the Tuesday. So that all the Monday, that would be perfect, because then it's received before the rent is actually due. Yep. Because the way we do our receipting with our trust accounting is we receipt a day behind. So when we do banking on a Wednesday, we're actually receipting for Tuesday.
Okay.
So once we receive rent, when we do banking on a Thursday, we're receipting for Wednesday. So we're always working a day behind, but it does show on your payment ledgers. So it shows when you've paid it, when it's come into the trust account, when we've receipted it. So there's usually 2 dates on a ledger, and then it shows for the period it pays for.
Right.
Now, some ledgers from different agencies using different software, they all have to show the amount of rent that's paid. But then on the far right-hand column, sometimes it shows how many days behind that money is from when it's been receipted and paid to what period it pays for. Does that make sense?
I think so.
The rent payment system can be quite complex to look at, but if you look at it on a calendar, for example, with that same Wednesday, Tuesday scenario, if you are constantly paying on a Tuesday, we'll receive that on Wednesday, and then we'll be receipting that. If you paid on the Tuesday, we'll receipt it on the Wednesday. So as for Tuesday, if that makes sense. So then it will always show on your ledger that you've paid it a day before it's actually due, because the payment period then goes from Wednesday to midnight Tuesday. So it might be from the 1st to the 6th of December, for example. And it's really important with those dates. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, 1 or 2 days isn't really an issue, because it's generally, okay, if you pay on a Friday, we don't receipt it until the Monday for the Friday. So then sometimes if anything comes over the weekend, it's not receipted until Tuesday for Monday because of clearing days.
Yes, okay.
And then that can put out your dates, because when it's been receipted to when it actually pays you for. And then it will show on your ledger that you're always 2 to 3 days or 1 to 2 days in arrears, which over a period of time, a good property manager will be able to look through your ledger and notice, okay, it's just a receipting situation.
Right.
But if it is constantly 4 to 5 days behind, and a good property manager will advise a tenant of that, it's up to the tenant if they want to change the paid date when they pay their rent. If they choose not to, it can have a negative effect on your application, because unfortunately, in this tight market, if we see that somebody's in arrears constantly like that and they haven't bothered to change it, that kind of doesn't sit too well with us, because we look at that and go, well, they haven't listened to their property manager if they have been notified of that situation. They haven't listened to that advice. What are they going to be like as a tenant with us if something goes wrong? Are they going to be open to discuss things, or are they just going to blatantly ignore our email? and not worry about it. So it's a really hard one, and we look at that from a risk management perspective because we don't want our tenants to be in arrears. We don't want our owners to be missing out on money come disbursement time because they've got bills. Like it becomes a domino effect after that.
Yeah.
And once you get behind, it is very hard to get back in front or get to break even as such. And because, cost of living, everything like that is getting more and more expensive. Not everybody has got a spare week's rent just sitting in a bank account for a rainy day.
That's right.
So it then becomes, okay, can I pay maybe $20 a week extra just to get it to build it back up, which takes a long time, especially when we've got all these higher rents now compared to what it was before. So it becomes a work in progress, which is the owner can see then it builds, but then it's not an instant, yep, okay, I'm out of arrears, it's fixed.
Yep.
So
they've still got that arrears sort of record on their ledger until pretty much the day they
it's
leave,
clear,
I suppose, or until they clear it.
Yeah. Which then is hard to leave if you've got an arrears on your ledger and it's been consistent for a very long time. And the thing is too, guys, so to all tenants, you get emailed a receipt every time your money is receipted. We have to, by legislation, we have to send you a receipt.
Yeah, so now, keep an eye on that if you're not getting sent that, because that's obviously really bad.
Really, really important that you get that, because then you can keep an eye on where you're at. So in terms of, property managers try their hardest to be across everything, but sometimes one or two slip through. You can't blame a property manager for everything. There is a level of responsibility as an adult to go, okay, yep, I mucked up there. I didn't check my receipts.
You sort of had the information there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like every time you pay rent, if it's weekly or fortnightly, you're getting that receipt 4 times or 2 times a month. And if you're not checking it, that's on you. It's the same with any emails you get. Like, it's up to you to open them and read them to make sure everything's okay. And also too, like if there's a rent increase, you've got to make sure that rent increase starts when it's meant to start. Or if you're a great tenant and paying ahead, you've got to start paying that rent increase a week ahead rather than the start date in the lease. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a whole different conversation.
Absolutely. So I suppose if you're a tenant, like such as myself, and you're kind of definitely you're entering a new property and you're wanting to do everything like as perfect or as best as you can to do it, that first step will be paying your 2 weeks rent, and that's on top of the bond. Is that correct? So you got your bond and then you pay your 2 weeks rent. Yep. And that will put you ahead. And then I mean, personally, what I do is set up a direct debit for the day before the rent's due, just to allow for those bank processing times so that doesn't throw me out. Yep. So I'll put that for the day ahead for direct debit, and then I'm 2 weeks ahead just forever, essentially. Yep. And then the only issue I've ever had with that is that if I don't have enough in my account for some reason, it'll say it didn't go through, and then I have to pay it. And then you just have to make sure you pay it that day, otherwise then you're a day behind and it can add up and things like that.
It can. So it's being an adult and being in control of your money and understanding what's coming out of your bank account, which is not something that everybody learns, unfortunately. I feel like it needs to be in the curriculum, but hey, another conversation.
I'm surprised that it's not. There you go.
But it's just being in front of that. And you know what? If you are paying really well and you don't have any issues, but then you have a slight little hiccup of, it might be around the Christmas New Year period, because that's when we've got bank holidays and it gets all a bit askew-if. More often than not, property managers are going to be understanding and go, okay, that's cool. You've had no issues throughout your tenancy so far. This is a slight hiccup. And generally any property manager that looks at a ledger at that will go, okay, well, these are the dates that it all happened. This is a crazy time.
Yes.
It's when it's out of the blue and it continues for a long time. That's where the questions start of, was there financial distress? Did you actually talk to your property manager about that? And I suppose it leads into as well having that relationship with your property manager, just to text them or ring them and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I set up the direct debit. I had one this morning. I set up the direct debit, but I don't think my partner did. He just did a one-off payment for the fortnightly rent, and I've just noticed in the bank account that there's more money in there than there should be. Yep. What do I need to send? And I'll get him to set up the direct debit when he comes off night shift. So, and I think she was expecting me to be angry with her, and I'm like, no, it's cool. I get it. When you're on night shift, you're subhuman. Don't worry about it. easy to fix.
Yeah.
And so she just paid a one-off payment and she'll get that set up later on. So keeping in touch with your property manager and letting them know if something's not right, you're better off to be upfront about that, take ownership like we talked last time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then because you've owned it and explained it, it's going to be an easier road rather than trying to hide it and then it comes up later.
Yeah, absolutely. In that respect, is there ever a case where you'll be in arrears and not be aware of it and have that suddenly become kind of negatively, like a negative thing on your ledger? Is that a problem? Do real estate agents always tell you if you're in arrears, if it's out by like a day or something like that?
It's a tough one because it's not all property managers are created equal, so they all have different processes around that. So in terms of rental payments, we at Parkstone, we check our arrears every day. And the moment that you're 2 days behind, we'll make sure, we'll ring you or we'll email you and just, hey guys, we noticed you're behind for 2 days. Is everything okay? It's not demanding payment. It's asking if everything's all right, because we don't know what's going on in their world. They might have had a sudden death in the family and they've had to fly somewhere, and we're the last ones that they want to tell what's going on in their personal life. But we always want to open that and ask that question to open the floor of going, okay, let us know. Because owners are humans as well. And if we let them know, hey, the tenant's had a death in the family and they've had to duck away and they're a couple of days behind in their rent, more often than not, owners are going to go, that's okay, we understand. And the empathy comes through there. Whereas if, by legislation, we can issue a notice to remedy breach for rent arrears on the 8th day that you're behind. So on 2 days, we'll send that email. Hopefully a tenant reaches out to us and says, hey, this is what's going on. We're really sorry. If we don't hear from them by day 4, we will start ringing and texting and saying, are you guys okay?
Right.
In that same conversation, we go, look, if you can't clear these arrears by 8 days, we have to, by legislation, to protect our owner and their insurance, their landlord's insurance policy. It stipulates it in there. We will, on the 8th day, issue you with a notice to remedy breach. No questions. Regardless what your story is, we have to issue that to protect the owner.
Okay.
And then if you remedy that breach in the time frame of that notice to remedy breach, that breach, yes, is recorded, but it's also recorded that you remedied it.
Right.
So it's there, but you've actually fixed it up. If you don't remedy it in that time frame of that notice, we can then issue a notice to leave for non-payment of rent.
Right.
And you have to move.
Yep. So it's a serious thing to get that
It's pretty
breach,
serious. So the
unfortunately.
question you were asking of can it get out of hand, or can
I suppose
you
without
miss
them
it?
knowing.
Yeah, without them knowing.
tenants knowing.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
Because, not everybody, like I said before, not everybody checks their emails for their receipts.
Yeah.
And good property managers will be on top of it before it gets really bad. But if in that instance where you're not told, it can get to that point. If there's a property manager that hasn't been on top of everything, or there's been major staff changes and it's been left, that does become a problem. And unfortunately, the tenant is part of that situation, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
And then it's playing catch up then. Yep. And sometimes by that stage, it is so far gone that it's really difficult for anybody to play catch up. Yeah. And sometimes the best thing to do there is, with owner discussions with the property manager, is actually just ending it.
Yeah.
And we rather than staying in a property where you're continually accumulating more arrears.
That's right. Yeah.
Because at that point, like if you're 3 weeks behind, that's 21 days. That's that's a lot of money.
That is a lot.
You're not necessarily going to be able to clear that inside 6 weeks by paying $20 a week. You're going to have to pay a little bit more than that. But there are avenues that you can take. With government bodies, so Department of Housing can help if you meet their criteria, means tested. Yep. But to answer your question, it can sometimes get out of hand if people aren't looking at their receipts. But generally, most property managers will check their arrears every couple of days, and then they'll be on to you. But whether they actually enforce anything, that's up to that agency. But there is a level of responsibility from you as a tenant to monitor that money side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously that's a good idea for life as well. I keep track of I use a lot of direct debits personally, and that's how I do that. And then the bank will tell me if something doesn't go through. So that's how I know that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people use Excel spreadsheets. There's apps out there that you can keep track of that with. Notion, that sort of thing. So there's lots of different options that it's getting easier and easier for younger people to manage that. So I think that's just a good idea to set that up.
So many app-based things now, even property management software. So there's ones at Property Tree, Property Me, Console. They actually have tenant apps, which you can actually log in if they have that open from their portals. A tenant can log in and see exactly where they're paid to. They can also lodge maintenance via it, and it becomes a way of communicating separate to an Outlook email or a Gmail email, because sometimes they don't always go through. But this goes directly through to your property manager via the app.
Fantastic.
But then it provides you a ledger, so a live ledger of what money you've paid and where it's paid you for, those rent cycle periods.
Yeah, that's really handy. So that's good to know that things are getting a little bit more techie, especially for these younger people coming through.
Keeping up with that.
It helps to have a nice visual to be able to see that in one place. That's right. That's really good.
And not necessarily having to just ask those questions during business hours. You can look at that at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well. Yeah, that's right. Fantastic. Well, I think that's handy information for all of us to know, especially in regards to arrears, because I think that's really scary for a lot of people. So that's all I had for this episode. Did you have anything else you wanted to add just about rent payment cycles, arrears, any other tips and tricks for tenants who might be listening in?
I think if you know that you may be struggling, or if you know you've got a big bill coming up and there might be a worry with your rent, talk to your property manager.
Yep.
That's the best thing you can do, because if you allow them to know of it beforehand, then they can help you prepare for that, and they can let the owner know that there may be issues with the next direct debit, and then they can make adjustments accordingly with their budgeting for their mortgage repayment coming out or their insurance payment coming out. It's better off to talk to your property manager, and then hopefully smooth sailing for you from there.
And I would recommend a phone call and an email or text. Make sure you do both, because then you've got written and you've got that personal chat as well. So that's my personal recommendation.
Definitely, if anything, emails are so much better, because then it's in writing. In terms of QCAT, so this Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, text messages can be used as evidence, but the text messages, if that property manager goes and that phone is wiped, it's a big rigmarole to recover those texts. Well, texts are easy and they're at your fingertips. Doing an email is always better. And then, even if you can send or attach to that email a delivery receipt and a read receipt. I know that's not always possible in Gmail and Yahoo and things like that, but at least then you have notification on your end that it's been sent, because then once it's out in the internet universe, it's done. You've done your part because you've sent it. If it's not received on the other end or not actioned on the other end, that's not your fault. You've done your part, and you've done what you need to do. It's now up to the other side to do their part.
Cover yourselves. Make sure it's all in writing. And but hopefully otherwise, though, if you've done all our steps we spoke about before, you shouldn't end up in that situation. But it happens.
It does.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this little chat about rent payment cycles.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you guys for tuning into this episode of Parkstone at Home. I've been Hayley.
I'm Elizabeth.
And if you just can't get enough of us, you can stream the podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and follow us on socials at Parkstone Property, where we post shorts from these recordings and other updates from the agency. But yeah. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
I wish I knew